As a creative aspect, TV is one of the best things that we do as a species. Along with music and film and books, they bring out the best creative of all of us. They entertain and they bring so much joy to many. They invoke emotion and enable us to feel things that we bury sometimes deep down. That's what this podcast is for. Welcome to A Million Little TV Shows. This is what I call the breakdown while I break down. Each week I will go through a different TV show, a different season of that TV show, and different episodes of that show. And I will break down not only emotions, but I will break down stories from my life, and let you know why these TV shows mean so much to me, and why I believe that they are some of the most important shows out there. This podcast is here to highlight a lot of smaller TV shows, or TV shows that don't really get a platform, because we know of a bunch of TV shows that get a multitude of different podcasts. Ted Lasso, Game of Thrones, The Office, they've all got several podcasts out there analysing all types of different things. But there's not many out there for the little guy, and that's what I'm trying to highlight. So each week I will go through a different show, different seasons, different episodes, and I will go across all different kinds of genres and different countries to bring you what I believe is some of the best TV out there. So I'm glad you're here with me. I'm glad you're here for this journey. And if you've watched the shows before and you wanted to come here and get an analysis on them and have someone go through them and pick out bits that you might have enjoyed, then I'm glad you are here. If, however, you have never watched the show and you just want to come and have someone talk in your ear about different TV shows, I'm glad you are here. But I hope that it inspires some people to go and seek out these TV shows. They deserve to be watched. They were made with love and care, and they are the same as this podcast, made with love and care. I am your host, Mike, and I will take you through every adventure, every horror, every piece of drama, and I hope that you enjoy the show. Hello there, and welcome back to this A Million Little TV Shows podcast. This is now episode 4 of season 9, and I cannot wait to get into today's episode. I am going to be finishing off 0 Day. Now, this show has been amazing. Obviously, I've discussed the parallels that are going on within the show as well as what is currently going on with the world, and it feels like this show is sort of telling the future. And I hope not, because that would mean that there is a cyber attack coming at some point, which would be fucking ridiculous. But hey, the way things are going right now, I'd never heard of Signal until this show and what happened in the States. So parallels are there. I'm going to try not to bring those parallels in because I think that this is too close to the bone right now. But look, this is a crazy time for the world, and I just want it to get better. As for the show, I'm going to focus on that. The acting in it's brilliant. You've got Robert De Niro heading up a stellar cast, and it's Robert De Niro. Again, I've said it before, you don't get Robert De Niro on TV. It was like what I said on the National Treasure Hunt podcast, when essentially I just said, well, you don't get Harvey Keitel on TV, and that meant that it was something special. You don't get Catherine Zeta-Jones on TV. It was going to be something special, and I thought that was a special show. Obviously, it didn't hit that well with fans, but hey, I liked it. But anyway, we're going to get into the show. We're going to get into the incredible cast that's in it. Like I've said before, Robert De Niro, Lizzie Kaplan, Connie Britton, Jesse Plemons, Angela Bassett. Give me more, please, because that is just brilliant. And then the cast around them, Matthew Modine, you've got some incredible actors in there, and it just gets better and better as you go along. So, look, I'm just going to get into this now because I just really want to finish up this show. So, this is 0 Day, Season 1, Episodes 4 to 6. Episode 4. We see a press conference where they are confirming that there has been another cyber attack. This time, however, it is on the banking system. We also keep getting glimpses throughout the episode of baying mobs outside of banks and outside of shopping centres and all sorts, because now people are unable to buy food. They are unable to actually get money out, and unless they've had any sort of money in the house, they now have nothing. The government has confirmed that over the weekend, as it seems to be a Friday when this happens, that the banks will be shut down. No one will be able to get access to any money. No one will be able to step into a bank. But also nobody will be able to do any trading or anything that involves money. banking apps have been shut down due to the sheer volume of people trying to get on them, and the country is in a disaster. George is obviously investigating, and he is trying to find out from Evan Green who has been ordering these cyber attacks, when they are happening, and who is involved in all of this. Evan is obviously just concerned about numbers. If he can get numbers to his podcast or to his web channel, then he doesn't care. The more he stays in jail, the more people are watching his show, even though he's not even on the show anymore. And so George believes that they've reached a impasse with him. He needs Evan to really start talking, and he even starts throwing things in like Anna Sindler's name, just to see how Evan reacts. Evan, however, just doesn't flinch. He essentially tells him, look, you've got nothing. And by this point, Evan has been held for nearly 3 weeks. He tells George that there's nothing you can do to me. Evan is informed that they are going to be checking his hard drives, and due to the fact that he's deleted all the files on there, whatever they actually find on his hard drives, they're going to book him with. He starts being a smart ass and just tells them that it was all porn, but they know that there's something wrong, and essentially threaten his livelihood. And as soon as they do that, he tells them that he wants his lawyer. Carl is with George at this point, and Carl tells him that it's not going to happen, you're not going to get your lawyer, but George just says, no, let him, because George now knows that they've got to him. Like in any other police procedural, as soon as someone mentions that they need their lawyer, that's it. They know that there is something that that person is now hiding. I mean, let's face it, how many times did we see that in Criminal UK? It was at least twice out of 7 episodes. When it comes to the relationship between both Alex and Roger, we get a very interesting shot of Roger speaking to Valerie while Alex is speaking to her boss, the Speaker of the House. And it would seem that Roger is starting to have cold feet on this whole Evan Green situation. He's thinking it wouldn't have took this long, and obviously with the nefarious means of how he got this information, and the fact it was basically a scare tactic to try and curry favour with Robert Linden, he's now starting to worry that this has gone on way too long. Alex, however, is having a very difficult conversation with her boss as well, because he wants the former president to be essentially brought up in front of Congress for this. Because everything that's happening right now is not looking good for the country. They've essentially, with the Black Ops, taken a man in the middle of the night who is only seen to be airing his First Amendment rights, the right to free speech. And so the Speaker of the House believes that Alex needs to start bringing her father in line, because this cannot stand. After all, it's America, for God's sake. It's the land of the free. But apparently, George is able to just do what he wants. And the Oversight Committee isn't overseeing what he's doing, or at least they're not calling him on it. And due to this, both Alex and Roger both want to leave, or at least Roger is trying to convince Alex to go. They can just get a little place in the country and just live out their days there. But of course, that kind of thing just doesn't happen overnight, so it's not something Alex can just feasibly do right now. So when Evan Green actually ends up seeing his lawyer tells him that Evan doesn't have the leg to stand on right now. Evan's trying to play the fool and just, talks about his followers, talks about what's going on, how the ratings are, and his lawyer essentially sits him down and says, look, I can't help you here. I can't get you out of this, and the only way to get out of this is you need to start talking to these people, because there's nothing now I can do. When Evan says they can't keep him here forever, he says they can do what they want. His lawyer appears not to be there as an actual lawyer, he's there as a friend. And he's essentially advising his friend to get himself out of this situation, give these people what they want, because otherwise they're just going to keep him where he is. Valerie has now taken it upon herself to actually start investigating this whole situation with George. She knows that there's been issues, and she obviously knows about this Project Proteus that is affecting George, or at least it is something that he shouldn't be mentioning in press conferences, because it shouldn't be known, because it was a private project run by the government. She heads over to one of the lead scientists, the only one who she can actually find, and she starts asking questions. He gives her a list of what actually is going on, and when she puts this list to former President Mullen's, he confirms some of the things that are on this paper, and some of those things are hallucinations, both visual and audio, which we know that he's seen visions of Anna Sindler, as well as hearing this song by the Sex Pistols, Who Killed Bambi, throughout the episode, and yet we're still unsure as to why he's still hearing that song and what it truly means to him. And so Carl starts to interview Evan Green, and genuinely, I wanted to punch him in the face for some of the things that he said to Carl. Carl Latino is played by McKinley Belcher III. Now, from that name, you wouldn't get that McKinley is a black man. And so when Evan is talking to him, he asks him, "Where are you from?" McKinley answers Baltimore, and he says, No, where are you really from? And it's one of those fucking questions that fucking pisses me off. I think it's an abhorrent question. Who gives a shit? At the end of the day, everyone is made up from the same material. Just because the pigment in their skin is different doesn't fucking matter. So essentially he tells him that his father was from Kenya and that is where his origin story would have began. And Evan starts to talk about the history of that country and all the things that have gone on within. And Carl just sits him down and says, I know all this. The thing is, right now, I'm on the other side of this. You are someone who is in my control. I think he uses the phrase, my boot is on your throat. And so it seems that Carl, knowing the situation that he's in, especially as a black man, he knows he has control here. And he isn't afraid to use it on Evan. And we realise that begins to terrify Evan. And it's here that in these interviews with Evan starts to spill his guts about everything that's been going on. He gives Carl 3 names. And as soon as he does, they begin to investigate these 3 people, trying to find out who they are, who they've been connected to in the last 6 months, and if they have any connection to this cyber attack. With the information that Valerie has gained from this investigation, she's had to speak with George's wife, Sheila. She's obviously told Sheila of her concerns about George and the fact that he is hearing songs and seeing things and is not in a good way. She begins to question whether he is still up to this job, knowing exactly what she knows and knowing the history of him, which we'll get to. So Sheila is now worried about her husband. She wants to make sure that he's okay and that he's still able to do the job that he has been hired to do, which obviously George isn't too pleased about. He tells her that he will take a cognitive test and he will make sure that if he is unable to continue this work, that he will quit. However, during this cognitive test, it turns out that it just seems to be a bang average test. Like, draw this or do this or whatever it is, and, I gave you 5 words earlier, what were those 5 words, etc., etc. Just trying to help along his memory. But the issue there is, at the end when the assessor asks, what is the song that I am playing right now? And George actually hears a song in his head. He tells her that he doesn't hear a song. And at this point, she is playing no song. So it's almost as if she got him, but she didn't get him at all. And so he ends up passing this test. And now it seems like he is cognitive, but his wife essentially spells it out best. She was hoping for him to be in cognitive decline because everything that he's doing, arresting people, terrorizing people, and generally being a bit of a tyrant, is now all on him. There is no excuse. He can't get out of this and say that his memory was slipping. So everything that George is doing is now on his head. George then meets with a tech mogul called Monica Kidder. She is essentially a social media tycoon and has something along the similar lines of Facebook or Twitter. Again, the parallels. And she is essentially trying to gain favour with the former president to be able to disseminate correct information about what is going on instead of the rampant lies that have been put out on her platform. But that would mean being allowed behind the curtain to actually be able to do this. Now, George, like most older men, isn't aware of what this kind of technology can do. But he is aware of the fact that Monica Kidder's company is actually under investigation because of antitrust issues, and that they are hoping that this will get them to have a foot in the door so that these things can just go away. And George isn't willing to actually engage with that kind of rhetoric. He wants to make sure that people are held accountable for their actions, but that may be something that he has to come to terms with himself in the end. Because right now he isn't being held accountable for his actions, but he really should be. Roger ends up in trouble when Robert Lyndon's goons turn up. They essentially threaten him and tell him that they need information from George's office, essentially they need his diaries, his books, and especially the one that he's currently using, because that will hold the key to any investigation that's going on, and especially when it comes to Evan Green. Roger, however, thinks about doing it, but actually decides that he doesn't want to. And so instead he ends up going to see Alexandra and tells her basically that he's pretty much been in love with her since the moment he met her. And when it came to her being in town again and him meeting up with her, he did something very sneaky and managed to hack both her phone and her boyfriend's phone. And essentially he was the reason that they ended up splitting up, because he leaked information to Alexandra about her boyfriend, which ended up breaking up their relationship. And so at that point, Roger was the one who swooped in, and he's been there ever since. Alexandra kicks him out, and when he goes back to his apartment, there's a knock at the door, and it's the guy who was trying to manipulate him earlier. Roger tells him that he has no interest in working with him anymore, and this guy bursts in with more goons. They take Roger down, and Roger is actually a recovering narcotics user. They inject him with something, and then they take him into a bathroom, fill the bath, and drown him. They leave drug paraphernalia all over and head out of the apartment, knowing that it will just be seen as a drug overdose and that he was back on the gear and his body just couldn't take it. Which obviously ends up devastating both George and Alexandra, because not only was he Alexandra's lover, but George saw him as sort of a surrogate son. George had a son earlier on in his life, and this is where we find out the significance of that song, because as the parallels are drawn, George, we see him at an earlier time of his life, and he is heading to his son's dorm room by the looks of things. The Sex Pistols song is playing, and he goes and looks at his son who is dead. In the very same sort of scene, he heads off to Roger's place and finds him dead as well. And the parallels are just helping whatever this is tick along. It seems like George is being neurologically targeted by someone, and this is potentially causing his memory decline, but also the hallucinations. This is Project Proteus in action. Episode 5. Obviously now they are coming to terms with the fact that Roger is gone. They've investigated the pictures that he brought in that were provided to him by Robert Linden, and it turns out that they are actually fake. Very good fake, but fake nonetheless. And so they have to let Evan Green go. Robert Linden had obviously set this up so that Evan Green would be taken into custody, and now that Evan Green has been also tortured at the hands of George Mullen's brigade, this whole commission is now seeming a little bit too dicey to be kept going. The public instantly find out that George Mullen has ordered Evan Green to be tortured, but they have no reason as to why. And of course, this is putting pressure on the president. President Mitchell wants to get rid of the whole zero-day commission, but she can't because she needs to look strong, and doing that would be a sign of weakness. And so she's asked by the Speaker of the House to actually let him run this whole division. He believes that George Mullen has had plenty of time, and he thinks that she should just let this go. Fire George or have him resign so that she doesn't look weak. He can head off back into retirement, and she can then appoint the Speaker of the House to this new role. But as soon as he says that, he also has Sheila Mullen take the stand in front of the Oversight Committee to actually talk about everything that's happened in the previous 3-4 weeks. He mainly wants to talk about the fact that George's commission has actually been torturing people. However, Sheila ends up handling this like a pro. She literally outsmarts the man and essentially pushes this all back on the Oversight Committee, on the Senate, and essentially says, you appointed him, he didn't want this. He was the only man who could really do it, but he didn't want it. And now you're the ones who've given him all this power that no other president has ever had. And you allowed him to run amok on everything, the Constitution and what the United States stands for. And so this is on you. This isn't on him or anyone else. And so in front of TV cameras and the press and the rest of the world, it seems like Sheila ends up getting the upper hand on the Speaker of the House, embarrassing him before he can actually take this new role from George. And so the president decides to give George another 24 hours just to try and get over the line with this. She needs a result, and she needs it quickly. But they can't keep waiting on George to continue doing this, especially now when there are rumours that the committee have actually been torturing people. It isn't a good look for the United States, and especially when it's someone who is in such a public eye. And so after the funeral of Roger, George and Alexandra talk. And it seems like they talk for the first time in a long time. I mean, they've spoken, but it doesn't seem like they've talked. And as they do, they talk about the fact that George's son, her brother, had died. They talk about the similarities between Roger and their family member. And it seems like Alexandra resents her father for the way that he has handled this whole thing. She tells him that if he'd only listened to her at the beginning, when they were setting up this committee, if she had been listened to by him, they wouldn't be in the mess that they're in. He ended up going on to this committee, and he should have just kept writing his memoir, just like she suggested. And so George, it seems, decides to do just that. He heads into his study and he opens his laptop. It would seem that he's never actually written a thing. And so when he opens the first document, he goes back to his retirement speech from when he left the presidency. In his diary, however, he finds something at the back. He finds a note saying boss. It's from Roger. It's something that Roger put into his drawer when he was actually going to take the president's notebooks and hand them over to Robert Lyndon. When he opens the note, he actually finds scribblings that Roger had been taking down. Now, previously, when the server bank in Idaho had been raided, they actually found a two-way radio, a ham radio, whatever you want to call it, CB radio, and it had been logged into evidence. Roger went down and had a look at this because he'd seen previously that Robert Lyndon had one on his yacht, and Robert had been secretly communicating with someone via this radio. Roger took a look at the frequency that it was on, and when he did, he started hearing messages coming over the actual radio. He took notes of them, and this is what he has given to the president. It's a huge clue, and it will help him exponentially. He also references the fact that he's seen Lyndon using one of these things. And so maybe Lyndon is someone who is of note in this. And so the zero-day team bring in cryptographers and start to try and decipher this code, running it through all sorts of different programs and code cracking software, and just trying to find out what this is, what it all means. It's conversations, obviously, but there is no clarity as to what it is just now. They also get their own radios and tune it into this frequency, and so they're all getting the messages and trying to crack the code. Eventually, when they do, they send out some information. They say that information has been left at Roger's apartment, and the person on the other end has to clear it up. And of course, while they're there, they get arrested by the zero-day committee. And this is the man that they've been looking for all along. This is Leon, the man who was referenced 2 episodes ago. And so when they bring him in, they find out that he actually works for a company that is now owned by Monica Kidder. And so Mullen sends some of his team out there to go and essentially bring in Monica Kidder. While George's team surrounds the building that Monica is inside, she realises that she has no options. She too has a CB radio, and when she tries to contact someone, nobody answers. And so she says that she will only speak to Mullins and Valerie. While Mullins and Valerie are on a call together with Monica, Monica brings up the fact that she also owns a company that deals with DNA, one of these 23andMe type companies. And then Monica starts to tell Valerie that she knows that Valerie's daughter has applied to have her DNA tested at one of these facilities. And it's very interesting, the DNA match that came back, because it turns out that this girl holds the DNA of former President Mullins. And so it would seem that while in office, Mullins has fathered a child out of wedlock while having an affair with Valerie. Now, we knew that they'd had an affair before, but we didn't realise that the child that Valerie had was actually Mullins's. And this is the first time we're hearing about any of this. But after this is revealed, all of a sudden, Carla Tino, who is actually at the compound of Monica Kidder, spies someone up on the roof. All of a sudden, shots ring out and shots are returned. And it would seem that Monica has no idea what's going on. She doesn't know who's shooting, and Carl's team are only shooting back in retaliation. Carl is injured in the fallout, and eventually the team get in and they arrest Monica Kidder and her team. once Monica is in custody, George gives a speech about everything that's been going on. George tells the press that within the code that was the 0-day virus, there was actually signature code which matches that of Monica Kidder's signature, or her company's signature. And so they believe that she was part of this. He reassures them and tells them that now this person is in custody, that America is once again safe, or at least safer than it was when she was on the streets. But after everything that we've seen, Alexandra calls the Speaker of the House. She's panicked and she tells him that whatever this is, it needs to be called off. He tells her, we're not doing this on the phone. You know how to contact them. It's at that point that Alexandra pulls out a CB radio and then heads to a channel. At this point, we're unsure if it's the same channel as what the 0-day hackers were actually using. But with all the use of CB radio, it would seem that this is a good indicator that she may be involved. And then right at the end of the episode, George gets a phone call. It turns out that even though she was in somewhere very secure, Monica Kidder has ended up hanging herself. And so now whatever evidence she had or she was going to give is now gone. And the investigation has opened up wide again. Episode 6. And so the episode picks up roughly from where it ended off. It seems like Alexandra has called a meeting, or at least the Speaker of the House has actually called the meeting via this CB two-way radio, whatever you want to call it. But when she actually manages to get to this meeting, the first question is, did we do this? She's worried about the fact that Monica Kidder is now dead, and she wants to know whether someone inside this whole shady cabal that is within the government is actually part of this conspiracy, and whether they are the ones that have murdered this tech billionaire. The Speaker of the House tells her that it's probably for the best, and that at least people are looking the other way now instead of looking anywhere near their vicinity, and believes that they've got away with this whole thing. If the tech billionaire is blamed, then nobody's looking for anyone else. The commission can get shut down, and that can be the end of all this. George and his team, however, aren't convinced by any of this. They think that something has to be covered up here. A tech billionaire who wanted to basically run the government down isn't just going to kill themselves to prove a point. Her point was being proven by the fact that they had this back door into the government or into these systems that they could just shut things down. And so why wouldn't they want to talk about that? And so after getting off the phone with his team while George is at his house, he gets a phone call from Alexandra. During this call, he ends up getting cut off just as he knows that Alexandra needs to come see him. The phone cuts off, and not only the phone, but all the lights throughout the country. Or I suppose since this is filmed in Washington, throughout Washington at least. The only place that has any power is the actual 0-day commission, because they've got a generator, and so they're still able to run. But obviously any tech equipment that they've got, or anything that needs a internet connection, has gone down. George is told that he needs to leave his home as well as his wife, and as he does, their motorcade is attacked by people on the outside. These are people who have been Evan Green fans who have been trying to get at the former president ever since Evan was arrested. This baying mob starts to set fire to cars in the motorcade and drag people out of the president's car. Just before they are fully attacked, the CIA director manages to scare off the crowd. He brings essentially an army, a black ops army of people to come and save the president. They take the former president and the former first lady to separate locations. The former first lady goes to see Valerie and make sure that Valerie and her daughter Lily, the president's daughter, are okay. Mainly because this will be a safe haven and they can post guards outside. They'll also be in the middle of the city, so it'll be a lot more difficult to get to them. George, however, is taken to his daughter's apartment. There are rumours swelling all over the press that George has died during this attack, and they are planning on this being a massive secret, because while George is dead, no one is going to be coming after him, which means he can start to work in the shadows and actually find out what's going on. He goes to see Alexandra and asks the question about what's been going on. She tells him that she's so sorry, she doesn't know what happened, it was just going to be a blip. Alexandra was under the impression that the outage was going to be for a minute, as it was in the first instance, and that would be it. There would be an issue people would die, but that would be it. And eventually they would be able to start to reshape government to make sure that the government was running more effectively and that things could be brought back under control. They could start to move legislation. She wanted to make the country better, and she was naive in thinking that the Speaker of the House had any compassion towards his own country. It seemed that he didn't. It seemed that this guy was just putting himself in a position to save the country so that when he did, it would be remembered and one day he would be president. It's already been stated in a previous episode when he was talking to the actual president, President Mitchell, that she stated that he would be the next person running against her. And so the Speaker of the House is asked about what has happened with George. Again, at this point, everyone believes that the former president has died at the hands of a baying mob. He gives the usual kind of thoughts and prayers, but doesn't really say a lot. He says that George was a good man and that they fought often, but there isn't any real substance to what he's saying. It's very much faux praise from the Speaker of the House. But not long after this conversation with the press, he gets a phone call. And of course it's George and he wants to meet. And the speech between the two of them is excellent. They talk very passionately about how the country would be best served and how their ideals for the country are to make it better, but the way that they are going about it from both sides of the aisle isn't helping whatsoever, and that a reshaping of the country would be the best way to go about things, but not in the way that they've actually attempted so far, and certainly not trying to cyber attack their own country. George tells the Speaker of the House that he is treasonous and that he will go down as such, but the Speaker reminds him that his daughter is culpable in all of this as well. And so, a couple of days later, it seems that George is ready to give his findings of what happened. And it would seem that George is going down this road of, well, it was the tech billionaire. It was Monica Kidder, and it was Robert Lyndon. They had done all this. And since Robert Lyndon had gone into hiding and Monica Kidder was dead, nothing could really be done of all this until Robert Lyndon reared his ugly head. It seems that the people in the commission know more information about what's gone on, but are willing to let the president do what he needs to do. And so the president is to speak in front of the Senate and tell them everything that's happened. But before he does, he heads over to go and see his daughter. While in his daughter's office, her secretary tells him that she's already gone. She's gone to do the right thing, and hands him a note, essentially giving her father gratis to do the right thing and say exactly what actually happened instead of just lying to the public. She knows that it would grate on her father to have to lie on her behalf, and especially in the disgraced way that he actually left his post previously. He left because he was having an affair with his chief of staff. He'd also gotten her pregnant, and he felt that that wasn't the right way to do things in government. What do you know, an honourable man in the White House. I wonder if certain people would do the same. George then heads over to the Senate and he delivers his speech. The Speaker of the House and the President have already seen what he is going to say and know that he is going to blame the tech billionaires for this. However, George pulls out a curveball on them and tells them exactly what has been going on. He tells the public that senators in the House and the Speaker of the House have been in a conspiracy against the country. He names them and they end up on a list for questioning. The Speaker tells George that he's weakened the country and essentially says, every lie that we tell is what is weakening this country. Today, I made it stronger by not lying. In a country that is currently all about division, standing together and telling the truth is what is required right now. And saying that as a Brit who has watched how Brexit happened and how that all went down, yeah, I think it's a very important message to put across. And so we can only assume that these senators and the Speaker of the House end up being arrested and questioned about what their involvement is in this whole scandal, including George's daughter. But I think it's massively important that how this show portrays things is how real life should be currently. Because right now we're living in an unprecedented age, and I'm hoping that people in the US can start to see how bad things have got, and they keep fighting the way that they have. Okay, so I honestly tried to stop talking about the parallels in this show. But I do think it has an important message that people need to start working together to actually listen to what's going on instead of making shit up in their own head and listening to shock jocks that aren't actually fully aware of the actual facts. All you got to do is a modicum of research before you actually stumble across horseshit, basically. But anyway, I'm not going to focus on that. I want to focus on the acting. I want to focus on the story. I thought the story was great. A cyber attack on the US, fucking phenomenal. How a former president has to come in to save the day, essentially, and do the investigation. And then other things around it, with the banks actually having a similar issue, and how the opportunists that would see a blackout like 0 day would be able to go, well, we can do it too. And then they started targeting the banks and causing chaos. And it was just agents of chaos doing chaotic things to try and destabilise people and destabilise the government. And you had a shining knight in the fact that Robert De Niro was trying to pull people together, but also that he was a flawed character. He had his own issues, and that showed when he had to torture Evan Green. There wasn't any necessity to do so in the end. Evan Green was just a loudmouth. And so George was a flawed character. We know this as well because he obviously slept with Valerie previously when he was president before. And we know that that caused division between his wife and his daughter. We know that he had a son who died in the White House while he was president, and potentially we don't know if that had any connection to the affair that his father had, or whether he was just a troubled boy. It was a really impressive show, and it was 6 very tight, very well written episodes. I think some of the storylines fell down a little bit. I think the whole thing with George having something that could manipulate him potentially in his head, I think that fell off a cliff a little bit because I don't think they explored it enough for a start. But secondly, when it turned out that he may not actually have this in his head, it was just written out as, it may be this Proteus thing, but it could actually just be, I don't know, maybe stress. And it just, it fell off a cliff that little bit. But I think the rest of it was great. And I don't see what more they could have done with it. I think maybe a little explanation of what happened to the conspirators in this, but in the end, you didn't really need anything. Maybe a bit more about where Robert Lyndon went. But other than that, I think it was an excellent show. Really great writing, really great acting. Lizzie Kaplan is always great. I think she's fantastic. Robert De Niro is fucking Robert De Niro. But I think my standout from the show would have been Dan Stevens as Evan Green. I think being this slimy shock jock, YouTuber, whatever he is, was such a great role for him. Like I said, in Legion, he was odd, and I didn't really get his character too much, but I liked the performance that he had in that show. And so having him in this and reminding myself of that Legion performance was excellent. I think, he did so well in the show, being the, foil to what the government was trying to do. And I think there's a lot of people out there right now that are in that same vein. I did also like how it kind of flipped it on its head, so we get a lot of talk right now about the far right and how that is affecting the world, whereas this seemed to be an extreme left party that was actually trying to do things right, but also failing in what they're doing. And if you don't believe the far right are currently failing, then you maybe need to give your head a wobble, as James O'Brien would say. While people stand together, they will fall apart. So, anyway, I'm done for today. I've done enough preaching, and I'm sick of hearing my own voice preaching about this now. So, I'm going to go on to do something a bit more fun now. So, in the coming weeks, we've got Kevin Can Fuck Himself, Inside Number 9, Sharp Objects, and Saint X. Obviously we'll be covering Ginny and Georgia as well, those final 3 episodes. So there's a lot more to go at. There's a lot more fun shows that are going to be coming up. There's some serious shows in there, but thankfully none of them are political, so you won't hear me ranting and raving again, at least for a while. Anyway, I'm done for today, so thank you very much for listening. come find me on whatever platform you... Instagram, Blue Sky, Twitter. Unfortunately, I'm still on that cesspool. YouTube, Spotify. I believe Spotify now has comment sections that you can engage with. Like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff, please, because it really does help out the podcast. And yeah, I hope you're all doing well out there. And until next time, I will speak to you soon. Bye. As always, thank you for listening to this podcast, and you could really help me and the podcast by giving a like, share, subscribe on all major platforms that you listen to podcasts on. As an independent podcaster, this will just help me exponentially when it comes to actually doing more things with this podcast. I truly do enjoy this, and I absolutely love revisiting these TV shows with you guys. So any engagement from you is always welcome. And I will try and listen to all of you when you give suggestions or just tell me what you think about the podcast. But once again, thank you for listening, and until next time, I will speak to you soon. Bye.